If there was an autobiography of your life, what would the title of it be?
That's a good question. I think the title would be um, uh, Leading in Humility and Vulnerability.
I like that because humility and vulnerability is something that is a little lacking in today's world. It's
I would
a
agree.
it's a little lacking, you
Yeah,
know. Ooh, yeah, that's a good title. I like it. I like
thank you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Take a Space Podcast. I am your host, Leah, and today I am joined by Adam, who is a part of our education series. And I'm really, really excited to have a conversation with him and talk about where we are in education and where we're going. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Leah. It's good to be
Yeah,
here.
tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Adam Smith. I currently live in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am an educator. I'm an education leader. I am a writer. I am a thinker, and I'm originally from Houston, Texas. HBCU grad, Tougaloo College. So that's a little bit about me. And I love teaching. I love leading, and I love mathematics. I was a math teacher by training. So that's a little bit about me.
So, what grade are you teaching now?
So currently, I do adjunct work at a college level.
Okay.
But I previously taught high school grades 9 through 11. Previously, did curriculum work for grades K through 5 for mathematics. I've experienced the whole gamut of K through 16. So it's kind of a cool perspective to have.
What got you into teaching?
Yeah, so I grew up not wanting to be a teacher. Really, it just wasn't part of like my bingo card as in life.
Right.
Um, so when I got to college, I actually double majored in math and music. Music was my love. I was a vocal major, but my mom was like, "You should do something, quote unquote, more stable." So I was like, "Okay, well, math is cool. I like
Of
math.
course.
Sure, I'll just major in that." I had no real plan for my career in mathematics, but as I progressed through my major, I noticed how many of my colleagues and my classmates like really just struggled with mathematics. I was like, okay, well, cool, I can help you. So I just became kind of like a tutor my whole college career. I was like, I enjoy empowering. Not only do I enjoy helping people with mathematics, but I enjoy like empowering and making people feel like they can do it, and like making them feel like they can be math learners and doers. So that's kind of what propelled me into a career in education. Became a teacher, and the rest is history.
So we have experienced this huge pivot, like in from 2019 to 2021, we have had to pivot a lot in education. What are some major impacts that you feel from the teachers to the parents to the students and admin have felt that people may not be aware of?
That's a really good question. I could take this in many different ways, but I'll start with this one. I think what we the education system relies so heavily on structure and control, and
Mm,
compliance. Um, Growing up in school, maybe we were just, we probably didn't realize it as much as we do as adults, but like, we were, stand in line, sit down and be quiet. This is your desk. This is what you eat for lunch. This is when you eat lunch. This is when you go to the bathroom. So there was so much control over our movements
mhm.
as students. I mean, I'm not placing a value judgment on it. That's just the system that we're in. But I think what the pandemic has shown us is that when we were outside of the school building, outside of the immediate control of adults, like teaching from home and like teaching via Zoom or via some virtual platform, I think teachers and leaders realize how little control we have over our kids' lives in a virtual space. So I think we had to really reprogram what education really means. Like, what does it mean to teach? What does it mean to teach from 8 to 3? Because we don't have their kids physically in front of us. How do we engage them? How do we hold their attention? How do we empower and inspire them outside of the bounds of our typical control protocols? And I think we really have to learn a lot about ourselves as teachers and the ills of education and how heavily we rely on those tools of control and power.
I'm sorry, I'm just writing down because
Yeah.
I feel like you're making so many good notes. And I think one of the biggest things that jumps out from what you said is the going from the control and compliance aspect where it's fully structured to finding a way to empower and inspire students and what that type of education would look like. Do you feel that now most of the kids are back in school, people are halfway kind of quarantining, I guess, but with students back in school 100%, do you think that we have fallen back into that structure of compliance and control and not really worried about the empower inspire aspect?
I mean, I will qualify what I'm going to say with this. I mean, our good teachers, our good leaders have always been empowering and inspiring. Like they just they do it within the system. So I will say that like the good teachers have been doing it before the pandemic, are doing it after the pandemic. Like that hasn't changed. But what I will say writ large is that thinking about our education system, I will say that in many ways, I think we have gone back to those, the status quo, quote unquote. Like I think we have gone back to the control because for a couple of reasons. One is that health protocols and safety protocols, like with masking up and like social distancing. So
right.
I think our educators feel they feel like they have to really put the hammer down sometimes to ensure that we have a safe environment per CDC guidelines. But I will also say, that I think that in coming back after 18 months of just really relearning live, I think teachers have and leaders have made more of a intentional effort to tend to the health of students mentally, even like having corners or rooms where students can cool off and and being more attuned to how students are showing up to them and how they're showing up for their students. So I think there has been more attention to those important pieces. So I will say that while we have returned to some sort of structure, I think that the things that we're doing within that structure have changed since the pandemic.
So, in a previous conversation that we've had with Jasmine, who is a fifth grade teacher, she said that when students came back, they didn't really know how to self-regulate their emotions, where they're just very reactionary instead of trying to problem solve or figure it out on their own. It's immediate tattling or immediate fighting. So have you experienced that even at the college level, where maybe not getting into fisticuffs, but people being more reactionary as opposed to considering their environment or what the context of the conversation is before reacting?
That's a really good question. Actually, I had this conversation literally just yesterday, last night, literally talking about self-regulation with one of my teacher colleagues. I will say yes, it is a real issue. I think that students not having the space to learn how to be social for 18 months. I think that has kind of caused a little bit of stunting of their emotional growth. I think that at home, there's of course a certain degree of structure, from the home environment, but it's just very different from school sometimes.
Right.
So I think that when students have been out of that practice in many ways. So yes, I think it's something that students are learning how to do again, and some for the very first time, because some students are littles haven't really seen a real classroom space.
Right.
I mean, some of our kids started school and some of our kids started kindergarten virtually. So yes, all that to say, yes, I do see that self-regulation has been an issue, and I know that And that's just like something that teachers and leaders have really had to figure out, like, how to problem solve around, because you can't punish, punishing and suspending every kid is just not the answer. Like that.
Right.
So like just kind of making systemic strategies around how do we really support students who just are learning how to do school again.
That kind of or the lack of guidance that could potentially be there for the self-regulation of students could also increase the sensitivity to others to call things that are not bullying. So how do you help guide a kid to, like, hey, they just didn't say something that they said something that you didn't like. It's not bullying if they disagree with you, or it's not an attack on your person or character if a person looks different from you, says something different from you, talk a different way. How do we start to kind of have those type of conversations? Because what I'm finding is that when I talk to some of the parents and some of the other educators, that many students are, accusing others of, just because they're different. It's kind of like what we see in the adult world. Oh, you disagree with me, you leftist. Oh, you conservative, right wing, blah 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 blah. And the kids are experiencing those kinds of things in schools. So how would you think that we should probably work through that and help the kids, like, hey, this is not what you think it is?
That's you're asking some really good questions, Leah. I mean, I think that's that's a fine line, because you want kids to be able to self-advocate. You want kids to advocate for their safety, for their well-being, and you want kids to have the tools to speak up when they are being bullied or are being treated unfairly.
Right.
But of course, like you said, you also want kids to be able to read situations and understand the difference between an attack and a disagreement. So I think that, I mean, what I'm going to say is tools that we adults have to like really learn and be able to practice as well. It's like one strategy we can use is I language or me language. So instead of saying this person did this person did that, it's like, well, how did it make you feel? Like, how are you reacting? How are you responding? So using I language kind of takes the focus off of the reaction or off of the other person and brings it to yourself. And it helps for like emotional regulation, and it helps like kids to really be conscious of their reactions and be able to make sense of their emotions, so they can respond and react in a appropriate or commensurate way to the situation. So bringing it back to self helps kids to read and respond in a regulated way, so that we as adults and kids, we can work together to assess if the situation in fact is bullying or attacking, or if it's really just differences or disagreements or just differences of opinion and of personalities.
So for those who don't know, what do I statements sound like, or what could they sound like?
Yeah. So like, let's say there was students or adults have had like a disagreement, and it's like, man, like Susie said this and this and this about me. Susie, she's not my friend. Like, I want to, I really want to fight her because she came at me wrong. She came at me wrong. So, so those are statements. Those are outward statements. Internal statements or I statements would be like, when Susie told me this, I felt this. It made me feel like this. When I left that conversation, I felt hurt or I felt angry. And I reacted in this way. I reacted emotionally. I reacted in a way that I wasn't proud of. So it's like, so as you're hearing these internal conversations, the focus, it's not even about Susie anymore.
Right.
It's about me feeling this way in a certain situation. So that's an example of like a really bad example of like I statements, and like, how do you turn the conversation from the outward stimuli to the inward processing of those stimuli?
I think dealing with the processing is just as important to the situation that occurred. Because if you don't deal with the processing, the situation can continue to happen, and you're going to continue to process it in the same way until you question why you're processing that way. You're taking to heart when a lot of people don't realize people are selfish. Like
Yeah,
we're not intentionally out to hurt you. We're not thinking about you. We're thinking about us. And
that's
I think
really
kids
important.
are so egocentric that they don't really know how to get out of that. Well, they did this on purpose. No, they just wanted a juice box and you just happened to be in their way. Like
Basically. There is no, honestly, that's so true, Leah. We are, I mean, we think about ourselves first often. And like you said, like kids and sometimes adults, we're like, we need to get out of our own head, and like everything's not about you sometimes. Like
right,
oftentimes it's not about you. It's about how you are moving into space, and how others are moving into space with you, thinking about themselves, and as you think about yourself. So like that's a really good point. People are selfish, and that's not a bad thing. It's just how we are wired. We
right.
think about ourselves.
So let's look at the collegiate aspect.
Yeah.
So at a 2 year, because you say you teach at a 2 year, right?
I've taught at no 4 year.
Oh,
Mhm.
4 year. Okay. So you're teaching at the 4 year level, and we've had students who went through their last year of high school in virtual learning and started their higher learning career in virtual and now going on to campus. What has that been like?
Yeah. Well, I will preface this by saying that I think there is. I think sometimes we're kind of like, you know, programmed to believe that higher ed is so much different than K-12 because kids are
Mhm.
growing up now. But there, I mean,
So
a
to
lot of the,
speak.
so to speak, right? But a lot of the patterns that we see in K-12 are the same in higher ed. So
Oh,
I think that so some of the struggles are very similar to our children in K-12. It's like students are having to relearn how they learn, relearn what they need to succeed, and be able to advocate for that. So I think students are figuring out that in K-12 I'm sorry, in higher ed, one difference between K-12 and higher ed is that in higher there's probably a little bit more freedom around certain things. So kids can like, well, not they're not kids. Our students can advocate for themselves in a different way. So they can say
mhm.
what they need and what they don't need, what works for them, what doesn't, um, because they have a little bit more latitude to be able to kind of build their learning environment in a way that suits them. Not all the time, but typically to a higher degree than K-12. Um,
Right.
so I think kids are learning what they not kids, they're our students, our higher are learning are like figuring out ways to better advocate for themselves and what they need to be successful in their learning environment. Because often definitely last academic year, but even to a certain degree this academic year,
Mhm.
there's still a little bit of choice. Like you can choose to be virtual or choose to be in person in some ways.
Oh, okay.
So like I said, it's not everywhere, but some institutions or some professors are allowing a little bit that kind of flexibility. So students giving like that ability to choose gives students tools to help them self advocate and like really figure out what kind of learning environment they need. Again, I was having a conversation just yesterday. This is crazy. Like just yesterday, I was talking to a parent, and her kiddo graduated, I think, this past academic year, like maybe May of 2021.
Mhm.
He took a gap year because he didn't want to be virtual. He didn't want to be virtual. He knows what work. He knows that virtual doesn't work for him.
Hmm.
Because as a senior in high school, I guess, he experienced a lot of virtual learning, and he just wasn't experiencing that success. So he
Right.
chose to work this year and take a gap year, and like so that we can have time to go back fully in person, so he could really be the best learner he can be.
I know virtual learning does not. I'm not engaged. I am. I am not engaged.
And the thing is, it's like it works really well for some. Like some kids really thrived in virtual. I myself probably would not have if I were in school. But some kids, I mean, I struggled teaching virtually. I know kids struggled learning virtually, but some kids, honestly, like that's how they found their success, because they were able to able to show up in a way that made them feel comfortable. They didn't have to come in and be social with their classmates, or be, have to like comply with different demands of the teacher. Like they were able to still learn, but in a more safe environment in their home. Again, that wasn't, of course, that's not everywhere. That's not for every kiddo, but some kids really found success virtually.
So when you say that you struggled a bit when you were teaching virtually, what were some of the barriers that you had to overcome?
I think a lot of them were what I was describing earlier. It's like I just had to relearn what teaching looks like. I don't have control over my physical space in my classroom. I can't design a learning environment physically where I want kids to learn in. So I had to like figure out, well, what does this designing look like in a virtual space where I cannot literally control what, the movements of my students. Like some of my students literally were like at work tuning in virtually with me and my class. Some were doing childcare, like some are taking care of their children, some are taking care of their parents. It's like there's all these live things that were happening as students were really trying to tune in. Like they weren't trying to like miss class, but they're like, I just have these other things that are taking my time and energy. So I had to just figure out what that means for me as a teacher. It's like, well, what do I require? What do I not require? What am I going to be lenient about? What am I not going to be lenient about? Like, what am I? And we call them in school, like as teacher language, like what are my universals? Like, what are my rules and protocols and procedures? And how are those? What's not changing and what is changing? So, like, really figure out as a teacher how I'm showing up to the virtual learning space, and what's going to help my students be as successful as possible. And what can I let go of? Truly, what can I let go of? And what do I not have control over? And having to be okay with that, and knowing that that's not going to make or break my students' success. So like assignments, like what is a late assignment? I don't know. Turn it in when you can. Like, let's talk about it. Showing up, like what does it mean to show up to class? Does that mean you come in camera on, mic on, or can you have your camera off? And do I make you turn your camera on or not? And oftentimes I didn't, like, because we're all living our lives at home, trying to learn. So
Right.
just what does it mean to show up to class?
That simple question poses like so many possibilities, but did it make you feel, or I would say I'd probably ask it this way. Changing from the physical space to the virtual space, you had to kind of change your focus of what it meant, not just providing your curriculum, but what is going to help the student be successful while doing your curriculum in this new space. Was that a hard turn to make, or was that really where you were going previously?
I think I speak for other innovative teachers and leaders when we say we're always trying to figure out, we're always like reflecting and learning how to be our best teacher self. So I think that the pandemic just required us to do it a little bit more urgently and a little bit more differently. So so in my reflection of how to be a better teacher, I was like, okay, well, this is what I'm given. This we're given a Zoom, and we're given a camera, and we're given a mic. But we're also given a virtual learning platform. We use Moodle, which is one of our virtual learning platforms. So it's like, how can I be a better virtual classroom designer? How can I be a better virtual curriculum developer? Instead of relying on the classroom space, the physical space, to like hand out papers or like give updates about assignments, let me be a better planner. So if a student can't come to class, they know exactly what they can expect this week and next week. So being just a better planner, so students don't have to rely on in-person or synchronous updates or synchronous opportunities. Like,
Okay.
and like I recorded every one of my class sessions on Zoom. So like uploading those recordings is like just being more accessible in those ways. So for me, it was being a better planner and being more accessible. Those were the two. I think if I had to put it in two major buckets, those are the major buckets that I really had to work on as a teacher, because I just wasn't really good at those things. Now that I reflect on it. So just kind of building my muscle in those ways, I think helped out with my student success.
And now that we've really kind of explored what your barriers were as teaching, let's switch a little bit to
Mhm.
talk about the students.
Yeah.
With in higher ed, with freedom comes a lot of responsibility, but it also comes with more barriers or hurdles to cross because you're carving out a space that fits you in this larger space where you're trying to gain access. So of course, higher ed has its own beast. There's a lot to overcome when you're starting, you're new, whether you need accessibility help or not. You're always looking for the right connections, the right teachers, the right courses, the right degree, the right counselors, etc. But if you're someone who needs help, whether it's support groups or connecting with the right clubs or making sure that you have accessibility to certain classrooms or things that would help you learn, what how has the pandemic exposed or exacerbated some of the barriers that you have seen in higher ed?
Mm. I think that first of all, it's a privilege to be able to attend higher ed. Like it just is. And I think
Yes.
students, but I think what we know about our current, current times is that having a degree is more required than not anymore. So it's like students are really trying to find their ways to get a degree, but they still have so many other life things happening. Like some students are working multiple jobs to not only support themselves but support their families.
Hmm.
Some students don't have the luxury of taking time off just to be learners for 4 years.
Right.
Um, so I think what the pandemic has shown is that our economy is fragile and it's adversely affecting those who were affected economically before the pandemic. Like it just was exacerbated, like layoffs and emergency workers or what we call frontline workers. Like they were more like their time was really in demand. So I think students found themselves having to really navigate um, their young adult lives in a way that they didn't have to before, or we didn't
Mm.
have to before. Um, some students could not sit at home in their parents' house just in their room learning for 4 years or learning for 18 months. Some students had their own. Some students didn't have a homes. Like some students were um, living on campus because they didn't have a home to go back to. So like they had to
Right.
live in their dorms and pray that the dorms would not be shut down because of quarantines, because some didn't have anywhere to go. Truly. So and some students didn't know where the next paycheck was coming because of the really tenuous economic situation where they get laid off or fired or not. Like, so students had a lot to carry emotionally and mentally, um,
Right.
trying to come into the learning environment. So what I will say is that to answer your initial question is that, like, I think um, we had to really be mindful of the services that we offer to students. Like, what does tutoring even mean? Like, what does that mean? We're all virtuals. Like, do students have to do students have to show up to another virtual classroom to get tutoring? Like, what does that even mean? Like, some students are struggling to even show up to the classes. What does that
Mm.
mean? What does it mean to have mental health support? How are we tooling ourselves to advocate for our kiddos? Is it mental health or is it just trauma dealing with the pandemic? Like, do they need mindful breathing exercises, or do they need resources? Like, do they actually just need physical resources so they can like focus on their learning? So
Yeah.
it's like, what do these supports even mean? And what are we offering in a meaningful way? Because mindfulness doesn't help when you are taking care of a sick parent who has COVID, or you are um, or you are teaching your kids, or your kids are also virtually learning from home, and you have to be there for them as parents, trying to support their virtual learning. So it's like, what does it even mean to provide for students when it's a lot of it's out of our control. So it's like instead, it's like so just how do you show up to allow them to be their best selves? What kind of space are you providing for kiddos or for students, so that they can be their best selves and learn in the best way, knowing that there's so many insurmountable challenges that they're facing every day.
So, how can a student advocate for themselves in this space, knowing that there are so many things that they're going to have to overcome? I mean, aside from gaining an identity or realizing what their identity is, and then figuring out their wants and needs, how can they successfully advocate for themselves in the higher ed space?
Yes, that's a good question. I think that in order for students to gain the tools to advocate for themselves, we have to first advocate for them. So they
Mm.
know what it looks like and it feels like when somebody shows up for them truly. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that the more that we can advocate for our students, the more that we can like say like, how are you feeling today? Like, what do you need from me today? Um, so that helps them be able to articulate that out loud. It's like, I don't know what I need. I know I'm feeling this way today.
Mm.
And I know that what this is not going to make me feel good. This is going to make me feel better. Um, so I think when we truly advocate, when we show up for our kids individually and so our students individually, when we ask those questions, and we provide those resources that they need that day or that week, that gives them the tools to be like, oh, okay, you know, Miss Leah, she was able to ask me these questions and she was able to provide this for me. I wonder if I can do that for myself. Um, so it's also not only advocating for students, but like giving them the space to advocate for themselves.
Hmm.
Instead of like expecting them to show up a certain way, we like leave spaces like, okay, hey Leah, like tell me, like talk to me. I see you're like, you're not really engaged today. Talk to me, what's going on? So like providing the space, to a safe space,
Right, right.
to be able to articulate those emotions, that also tools them to be able to advocate for themselves. So it's teaching them. It's literally have to teach them how to do it.
Do you think higher ed is doing a good job? I mean, I know you can't speak for all higher ed, but where you are in the space that you occupy, do you think that higher ed is doing a good job with teaching students how to properly advocate for themselves successfully?
I would say no.
Mm.
I think that no, what I know is that having worked as a professor full time for 3.5 years, what I do know is that for some reason, we adults, who are not much older than they are sometimes, we expect them to come to college automatically having all these adult skills. Like they know how to self-regulate. They know how to, they know how to like, their executive functioning is like, through the roof successful. Like they know how to balance work and life. I think we expect them to have to come to us with these really, really grown adult big skills,
Mm.
but we don't teach them those skills growing up in meaningful ways. So it's like we can't expect them to just like, okay, I'm going to college now. Let me put on my big boy, big girl hat and like, be able to move about the world. So I think what we expect from kids is not what we get, but we're not what we haven't done successfully is teach them how to grow up, how to how to how to how to how to self-regulate, how to
Mm.
build their executive functioning, how to advocate for themselves. So I think that we have high expectations for our students, but we're not bringing them up to those expectations.
So that space from the expectation to where they are, that space hasn't been created to help them learn how to be that. Those expectations are just there.
I would say so. And again, like I think there are pockets of success. Our good professors, our good leaders, like they know how to do that. They've been doing that for years. But I think
Hmm.
systemically, higher ed hasn't provided those structures, to bring help our students get up to those expectations.
So, any professors that are listening right now, what advice would you give to them and those of you who are teaching, thank you, especially if you're doing your very best and owning your space. What advice would you give to help reset those expectations so that they're not setting the kids up for failure when they walk in the classroom? You should know how to do this, this, and this, and this. I just graduated from high school 3 months ago. Like, what do you mean I should know how to do these things? My high school teacher didn't expect this from me. So, how can professors learn how to, or even think about resetting those expectations to allow that space to probably progress to teach the students how to meet those expectations?
Yes. What I will say is learn from K-12 teachers. Figure out how they teach and how they provide for their students, how they design their
Mm.
classrooms, how they structure students' learning environments. Because I never have really understood this, but for to teach, to be licensed as a K-12 teacher, you have to go through certain classes and degrees and certifications and trainings. Um, but to teach on the college level, you often don't need that. You just need like a degree in this certain subject, and now automatically you're an expert and you're a teacher. So college professors often don't go through the same trainings that our K-12 teachers have had to go through, and
That would
it
make
shows.
sense. Hmm.
And it shows. So it's like so many college professors just don't know how to teach. They don't know how to show
Very
up for
true.
students. So my advice would be to you know learn learn how to teach. Like learn from teachers, read blogs, read research, read books, talk to your teacher friends. Like figure out what it takes to be able to be a good teacher, because knowing the subject matter just isn't enough. And we know that. We've experienced that as students. Like knowing the subject matter just isn't enough. That doesn't make you a good teacher. So
Agree.
if you weren't given the training in your degree journey, then figure out how to get it. So that you can be, I've been around professors who were teachers, who were K-12 teachers before they became professors. Like I was one of them. And like you see a difference. Like you see a difference in how those professors approach their pedagogy and their craft. You really
Hmm.
do see a difference between those who had the training, K-12, and those who did not.
I It makes sense now that you say it out loud how much training K-12 has to go through. Like even taking a psychology class to understand child
Mhm.
development.
Yep.
The if many of the teachers who don't have to wait to hit their 30-year mark to realize, oh snap, my my classroom should be more student focused instead of just getting out the curriculum information and testing them to see if they've learned anything. um it's it's a little disheartening when you have those professors who are more curriculum focused than student focused. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, like I have a life outside of here. But it doesn't bode very well if you have many of those curriculum focused teachers and then you get into the workforce and then you don't really have any advocacy skills
Mhm.
because you weren't really in the space to have someone ask you how are things going, and you have to really deal with that processing of how you're handling things so that when you do get into the workforce, whether white collar, blue collar, whatever job you're working, whatever field you're in, you have to be able to advocate for yourself and not just come work like a horse and then go home.
Mhm.
So college, while it is a luxury for so many people, it should still offer you the same space to build up those advocacy skills. At least I would hope.
Absolutely.
At least I would hope. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the racism, sexism in education and how that has impacted the education system, especially in higher ed.
Yeah. So what I will say is like what I know and what we've all witnessed is that the pandemic had a certain way of spotlighting so many of our social ills.
Mm-hmm.
for example, the economy, like we saw who was able to go to work, who was able to work from home and who wasn't, like who was able to not be as adversely affected by the pandemic and who was. Like, I mean, during the pandemic, we had one of our um, biggest social uprisings of our recent history. You know, with the
Right.
with the many murders um, of Black folks at the hands of law enforcement. It's like, you know, it was almost like a monthly thing. It was really, really, really jarring. So it's like, so while we were having you know, a pandemic, a health pandemic, we were also having a social justice pandemic. We are having a racial pandemic. Um,
Absolutely.
so schooling is designed, you know, at its fundamental level. Schooling was created to support white men. There's a lot more history in that. I mean, I know it's a very, very broad generalization. I know folks probably are gonna agree, but like, without going into an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours long of like why I said that, why what I said, we see echoes of it. We see how we see who gets. Look at who's in our honors classes. Like, look at who's tracked into higher levels of math or pre-AP or AP classes, and look at who isn't. Look at who is often suspended or are treated as behavior problems and who is not. You know, research has shown time and time again that our Black students are suspended or disciplined at disproportionately higher levels than our white kiddos. We know that representation in the teaching force is overwhelmingly white. We know that representation in STEM is overwhelmingly white, and we know representation in the prison system is overwhelmingly Black. Like, these are things that,
Right.
these are not opinions; these are facts. And we see how schooling has socialized us into the haves and have-nots. We see, I mean, funding structures, even like the schools with higher tax bases are given more resources. Schools with
Mm-hmm.
lower tax bases are not. I mean, so it's like these are just things that existed before the pandemic. But I think the pandemic has just shone a spotlight on how bad it really is. So I think it's hard. So it's we can't talk about how the pandemic has affected us without talking about the differential ways it has impacted folks based on race and gender and class, etc. And I think that, and as a teacher at a HBCU, and as a educational leader in a majority Black school district, you know, you saw students carrying this trauma of like not only the pandemic, but also how the pandemic has more adversely affected them than maybe their white colleagues down the road. Um, so yeah, it's hard for me to talk about the pandemic without talking about all the forces that have been further exacerbated by the pandemic.
There's also some things that people I hear, you know, echoes of it, but not really talked about, where we discuss the food desert situation.
Yes.
There were so many schools, I mean, so many students, parents who are relying on the schools to make sure their kids are fed. And if we go to virtual, how are the kids going to eat?
Yes.
You know, how are they, if we now have a workforce that can't go to work because we're in a pandemic? We had unemployment debated by people who are salaried and
Hmm.
not losing a dime, you
Hmm.
know, discussing whether or not somebody should get $600, you know.
Exactly.
And it's just like, are you kidding? People are not eating. And I think that the most sobering view was, even in my neighborhood, driving past the school and seeing the long line of cars because they're doing a food drive, because so many people need those groceries. So many people need that help. And I mean, you don't see those in other neighborhoods. Like, those are really a lot in our neighborhoods. And it's, I mean, that line was hours long. They were probably out there all day. But even not just solely the educational aspect, but and not just even the social aspect, but if we're relying on schools to make sure that they're fed, and we don't have jobs for safely for parents to go back to work or something that they can do virtually, then it really highlights how much we're actually valued in society. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's a very sobering thought
it is.
of
It
where
is.
your value lies, of whether or not, like, some people have been able to work from home, no problem. I was one of those people, thank you Lord. I
Yeah.
was one of those people to be able to work from home, but I was one of few
Yeah.
on the grand scale
Yeah.
who have been able to transition from going to the office to going home. A lot of people, like, whether you work in transportation, whether you work in the quarry, whether you work at the grocery store, you didn't have that ability to be able to work in a safe
Mm-hmm.
environment.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I'm not saying that no other ethnic group has ever had to deal with trauma. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Yes.
But like we talked about, there is a disproportional amount of Black people who've had to deal with a lot of this trauma more often than not.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I feel like sometimes that gets lost in the conversation, where we're just like, we're saying all lives matter, but these people are jobless.
Mm-hmm.
They are a paycheck away from not having a house. They are not able to have a stable job with benefits, or their benefits keep getting cut because they're expendable, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not treating them like human beings. They're just expendable workforce pieces that we can just do whatever with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't mean to bring it down.
No, no,
I'm just like,
no, this is
that
real.
was
This is real.
that was just a thought, just as I'm driving past the school and seeing the line, because I was like, school? I don't think school has started up yet, and because we're still in quarantine, but they're like, no, it's a food drive. I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
And I know that many of our school districts that are quote unquote, they're Title I, which means our students get free and reduced lunch. Many of our school districts um, still provided breakfast and lunch for families. Like they like literally like come get your breakfast and lunch every day.
oh, really?
Yeah. Like they still provided because like you said, like our students relied on those 2 meals a day.
Hmm.
So yeah, so even during the pandemic, there was funding allotted, thank goodness, for parents and students to still get those meals, even learning from home. So because like you said, it's like the problems don't go away just because we're at home. Like these are things that our families really relied on. And like you said, like at the school district in the gated community across the way, that just isn't a conversation, but it really is like, but it's a need for some of our families and communities to have those 2 meals a day for their kids.
I think that it should be a conversation that's had at large, instead of the anecdotal, well, I'm Black and I never had to go through that, or I'm a person of color, I'm indigenous, I'm this, and I never had to experience this. And it's like, yeah, great for you, but the numbers don't lie. Like, there's more of us in these dire situations than not. Like, I'm glad that you didn't have to be scathed
Right.
by justice. Like, I've never, like, I can say, no, I've never been shot by the police and I don't know what that is, but I know people who look like me are targeted on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like, I know what that is,
Mhm.
and not try to have this what do you call it, like, cognitive dissonance of just like, well, that has nothing to do with me. And it's like, there are things that you can do. You can go out and vote. A lot of our school leaders are voted in.
Yep.
Are we taking care of our students? Are we making sure we're checking in on our people?
Yep.
But it's not a situation where, oh, all of it is out of my hands, I can't really do anything, I'll just operate inside the system and the system will work how it's supposed to work. And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's more to it than that. There's a little bit more to it than that.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
thank you so much for this conversation.
Okay.
I've really had fun in talking about this,
This has been
and
great.
I feel like I've learned a lot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoy just being able to have opportunities to articulate my thoughts. Like you're just bringing me on to talk. Cool. I can do that. So thank you so much for providing this space, taking up space, and really providing to your listeners and to everybody else these really crucial conversations.
Yeah, thank you. This is your time to plug anything that you have, whether you have a book, a class, a
Mm.
website, whatever it is, go ahead and plug away.
Yeah, so find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. My Instagram name is AE Smith 712. Um, and find me on LinkedIn, Adam Smith. Um, I wish I had a book or other things. I'm just out here just trying to be my best educator self. Um, but yeah, I do math tutoring, I do leadership coaching. So hit me up. And yeah, just let me know how I can further support you and take up space, podcast, Leah, and how I can support the listeners as well.
Thank you so much. Y'all make sure y'all go follow Adam. Make sure that you reach out if you have any math questions. I know all of us are not math people, especially my writers out there. So you're going to college, you're in high school, reach out, say, hey, can you help me with my math problem? I'm sure that Adam will be able to help you out, no problem. And
Yeah.
then make sure to follow us at Take Up Space Pod. That's Take Up Space POD on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you'll be able to check us out on YouTube at Jacob Space Pod. Just type that in and you'll be able to find all of our videos. And make sure to subscribe as well. We're trying to get our subscribers up on YouTube. But thank you very much, Adam. Thank you to the listeners. We'll see you all later.